All right, good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Faye D'Souza. It's time to take a look again at what's happening with the election developments. We've had quite a few things happen, specifically in UP, which is where, everyone's focusing right now. Remember, UP elections will be held in February, March next year. That's fairly quick. There was, of course, a ABP voter poll that came out 2 days ago. It said the BJP is likely to enjoy a comfortable victory in Uttar Pradesh. It might suffer some seat share loss, but this is the third pre-poll survey conducted by ABP voter. Now, it says that out of the total 403 seats available in Uttar Pradesh, the BJP is likely to get between 212 and 224, which gives it a comfortable majority. It then also gave the Samajwadi Party about 150 to 163 seats. This, like I said, was 2 days ago. There's, obviously an interesting breakup of how these seats are actually coming in, and that's the conversation we will have. But just to give you an update on everything that has happened, Prashant Kishore, who's become sort of the voice that everybody follows for election, has basically said that whatever happens in Uttar Pradesh is not necessarily a mirror to what will happen in 2024 national elections. His point was that, in the last election in Uttar Pradesh, the BJP didn't really ace it, but that was not a reflection of what happened in the national elections. Also remember, big events, the Prime Minister is still in Kashi. He inaugurated the first phase of the 339 crore Kashi Vishwanath corridor project, plastered over television channels for the better part of 2 days. So really a messaging being sent out there, from the BJP by the Prime Minister to the country. BJP, it's been written about quite clearly that they were using this as an opportunity to bolster the image of the Prime Minister and the Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath. There is this Dharma Purush image that they're pushing, and we're going to talk about that and try and figure out what that means as well. Very large crowds being pulled by Akhilesh Yadav in his election campaign as well, and their signature red hats, and we will figure out what that means as well. But a very quiet information coming in that Rahul Gandhi will participate in a Padyatra from Amethi on the 18th of December as part of a larger campaign that the party is doing. Not a lot of information coming in on what the Congress is up to, not a lot of information coming in on what Mayawati's BSP is up to either. This is the information, this is roughly what we have on top of it. Joining me this evening, Ms. Neerja Chaudhary, senior journalist, who's been tracking Uttar Pradesh for decades and decades, so couldn't get a better voice. We'll also have Mr. Javed Ansari join us in a bit as well. He's also a senior journalist. Ms. Chaudhary, good evening. Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to break this down piece by piece because there's so much to digest in all of this. But the first thing to look at is the Prime Minister's massive campaign out of Kashi. Is it very clear? Is it clear enough messaging to win over the state? What are you reading into it? What is your review of the attempt made by the BJP?
I think a couple of things, Faye. We are all trying to digest, and things are happening very, very quickly now. Events that are unfolding. One, the Prime Minister launched the BJP's campaign for all practical purposes from Kashi.
Yes.
These last 2 days. Number two, we know the pitch that he's given it. It's going to be Hindu identity around the mandirs with a civilizational packaging, plus social welfareism that they have talked about, that they have, engaged in the last years, which are the different programs. Now, the Prime Minister being Prime Minister and the BJP being the new BJP under him, it's a mega machine. And everything that the Prime Minister does is what he calls bhavya, grand, on a grand scale. So also in Banaras, what we saw, Varanasi, was this huge grand, remake of the Kashi corridor. And we saw every touch that you saw, the sprinkling of flowers on the workers who had constructed it. That's a typical Modi touch. Going to the railway station at 1 a.m.
Yes.
A typical Modi touch. But all this is, calibrated by Modi has, as I said, a mega machine, global experts in their scores to help him think through the messaging, how the messenger should come across. I mean, it's a fine art that they have made it into. So pit that against a party like Samajwadi Party, and Akhilesh Yadav is drawing crowds, and the crowds, the number of people is not important. It is the excitement in the crowd, the enthusiasm, which politicians learn to read. And that has been there. The R&D meetings have seen excitement, which has been missing for the last 20 years. Their own people say that. So given that, are people looking for change? Obviously, there have been unhappy with the Yogi regime, but will the opposition's messaging plus, the wherewithal and the machinery you need to convert it into votes be good enough?
So I have this question for you, and Mr. Javed Ansari has joined us as well. Good evening, Mr. Ansari. I'll come to you
Good evening, Faye.
Because there's an interesting turn of, the BJP has sort of changed the rules on this whole thing. But Mr. Chaudhary, here's the question, right? We're coming out of COVID. It was bad for the economy. People went through a very difficult time, arguably worse perhaps in Uttar Pradesh than anywhere else, although the government will deny that. If we look at the BJP's campaign right now, led by the Prime Minister, flanked a little bit by Yogi Adityanath on his right, it's very positive. Everything is good. Everything is shiny. It's very religious. It's very feel good. This showering of petals and just everything is just shiny and new. Is that enough, you think? Because people want to forget COVID, let's be honest. It was a bad dream. Everybody wants to move away from it. Have they read that situation really well? Because it's going to be difficult for the opposition to remind people of COVID right now.
No, I agree with you, Faye. Will families who've lost their loved ones, and we all saw those bodies down the Ganga, will they forget? Will the economic distress that is hitting people, prices. You talk to anyone, they talk about this today. Loss of livelihoods, children being pulled out of school, child marriages on the increase. We've seen all this. The Prime Minister is trying to dilute the anger and unhappiness of people. They know that they are aware of it. With this, as I say, the mega show, the cultural pitch, the religious pitch, I don't know whether they'll succeed. But the opposition is in a very good position today. But does it have the machinery? Does it have the narrative? Does it have the messaging to do it? And Rahul Gandhi, I'm sorry to say this, in Jaipur again talks about Hindu versus Hindutva. You're fighting on the BJP's turf. Your rally was on Mengai.
So today, of all the people, Mr. Chaudhary, we had Mamata Banerjee today talk about the fact that she's a Hindu Brahmin. I mean, there's very little, there's slim pickings at this point for the Indian voter.
As far as the opposition parties are concerned, you can expect them to strengthen their own individual bases till 2024. And why not? Then they will look at each other and say, I bargain with you from a position of strength or weakness. And now let's sit on the table.
Right.
So that unity together, that Mamata versus Congress, I think that picture will get clear nearer the general elections, not now.
In fact, on this point, I want to bring in Mr. Ansari. Mr. Ansari, the Prime Minister occupies a constitutional position in a secular country, and is now, we're increasingly see him do very religious things. And it's become commonplace now. I don't think people raise their eyebrow at it anymore because we've seen so much of it and we expect so much of it. And it's done with such pomp and splendor that it's become part of government, sort of exercise. The entire, let's be clear about the fact that the entire Kashi construction that we saw being inaugurated and the event was on taxpayer tab. The the manner in which elections are fought, the tone in which constitutional positions are used have changed completely. In your career as a journalist, Mr. Ansari, have you ever seen anything like this?
No, and like Neerja ji was saying, Mr. Modi has changed the rules of the game and changed it how. And he's normalized a lot of things which one would have considered no-go areas. And the fact is that everybody appears to have accepted it, especially the media. We've gone for it hook, line, and sinker. Even if Mr. Modi has a glass of water, which is normal, any human being would be expected to, we believe it is our bounden national duty to cover it. So, and it gets magnified. Yes, I agree with Neerja that the BJP has a mammoth machinery. I mean, this is a very well-oiled electoral machinery, and they have in Mr. Modi a leader who is arguably the tallest leader in the country at the moment. But these were the same factors that were in play in Bengal as well. These were the same factors that were in play in Delhi as well, and they didn't amount to much. The very fact that Mr. Modi has begun to do the heavy lifting on behalf of Mr. Bisht, Mr. Ajay Singh Bisht in Uttar Pradesh, shows that the BJP realizes that they have a fight on their hands. The ground has shifted from under their feet in Western UP. They are on a very precarious, they're skating on thin ice in Eastern UP. I've just come back last night from UP. I was in Eastern UP when Akali Yadav started his yatra, and you have to see there. I've covered a lot of elections, and I can, you see the crowds. It's not just the size, but see the kind of enthusiasm, the participation, and a lot of another thing which people appear. Everybody talks of this huge social plank that the BJP has built. Yes, but a lot of those votes have those smaller castes have begun to drift away, because this has been a government run by a particular class for the benefit of a particular class. I'm sorry to say about this, but this is a fact of Uttar Pradesh. We may choose not to address the elephant in the room, but that's the ground reality. You go and ask how the others are feeling, and they are all smarting on how a particular caste, the caste that Mr. Bisht belongs to, is running roughshod. I don't know what has happened to the media. When Akhilesh Yadav and Mulayam Singh Yadav were in power, from day one, everybody kept highlighting how the Yadavs were, all the plum postings were going to Yadavs. There's a deafening silence now, and it's very strange and it's very sad, but that's a fact. So the point I'm making is that yes, there are a lot of factors, resources why the entire opposition cannot match what the BJP has. They have a huge machinery, but do they have the ground support? That's what matters in an election. And there, I believe a lot has changed. There are still a couple of months to go for the elections, but the BJP really has a mountain to climb. This is an election for the SPs to lose.
Ansari, you did mention the media, and I wanted to ask the both of you that question. Obviously, there is the considerable financial resources that the BJP has access to, their ground team that's actually on the ground doing the work. But there's also, let's be honest, the media that's batting for the BJP, quite obviously. For example, the Prime Minister's events at Kashi yesterday were run non-stop live across television channels throughout the day. Channels were calling him the Dharma Purush of Kashi. It was not objective. As journalists, we know this was not objective, and all of them did. There were no exceptions. How important, Mr. Ansari, in your opinion, is the role that the media will play, Hindi and English, in this election, in the Uttar Pradesh election?
So they will have a big impact, especially the vernacular press, the Hindi press. Just look at the amount of money that Mr. Ajay Singh Bisht's government has spent in the last couple of months giving out ads. And then there is the surrogate advertising through the likes of Baba Ramdev, etc. So they are pushing all the buttons that they
Could you explain the surrogate advertising via Baba Ramdev?
Baba Ramdev is doing all the advertising, and who are they batting for? It's very clear who are they batting for. They decide. Baba Ramdev, they were having a debate on a TV channel regarding this controversy with Baba Ramdev had come down hard, had badmouthed the allopathic doctors. They were having a debate on that, and that program was sponsored by Coronil, which Baba Ramdev is. And he was sitting there with a placard which says sponsored by Coronil. So, I mean, where is the objectivity? That's a word which went out of the media's lexicon several years ago. So what are we talking about? Why should every glass of water that the Prime Minister has, every time he takes a dip into the Ganges, why should that be national news, breaking news, non-stop? I mean, channels don't, they forego their commercial breaks just to ensure that coverage. Is this a level playing field that you're kind of provide? So look what the opposition is against. They have the might of the Indian state. You're actually battling the might of the Indian state as well as a huge electoral machinery of the BJPs, and also people who are battling it out on behalf of the BJP. They've got all the commercials. They're pulling all the commercial strings.
Ms. Chaudhary, do you agree that the might of the media right now is with the BJP in this election?
Yes, I think it's weighed very heavily in favor of the Prime Minister getting him covered. Absolutely right in the way the Kashi event has been covered by the media. I don't think that kind of a coverage would be given to Akhilesh Yadav or Rahul Gandhi or Priyanka Vadra. Certainly, the scales are in their favor. What we have to see is that the anger amongst the people, and is it anger amongst the people, and are they quietly going to wait for that poll day and make known their choice? And will that go against the BJP? Otherwise, what I am afraid of course, the BJP is starting very, very high last time. Even if it slumps or falls sharply, whether they will still make it, that's their calculation. The last lap is very important, as we saw in Bihar. Tejasvi Yadav's rallies were huge. People were unhappy. People were enthusiastic for him. And it was the last mile where he lost out. Now, why that was, we don't know. But was it because of the machinery? Was it the booth level planning? Was it that this juggernaut, that we have to, the opposition has to contend with, both with messaging as well as, resources. And also, I think, to be fair to the BJP, they've got that killer instinct, which sometimes I feel the opposition lacks.
I want to ask you, because Mr. Ansari brought it up as well. We know that Uttar Pradesh votes based on caste, largely. This was the status before this election, if I'm mistaken. About the SP and the BSP hover around 20% of the vote share. The BJP's vote share spiked very sharply to nearly 50%. Now, the SP normally has the Yadav and the Muslim vote. The BSP has the Dalit Jatav votes, and the BJP gets the Brahmin votes. Is this how it remains, or has there been a shuffle or a change there? Where does the Congress come in, Ms. Chaudhary?
Look, as this time it's very interesting. The BJP has benefited from Western UP going heavily in its favor in the last election, 2014, 2017, 2019. Western UP, there is a real restiveness. I would say there is unhappiness with the BJP. The Jats have moved away. Large chunk of Jats had moved away, who voted for the BJP in these last 3 elections. And that is because of the farmer stir. I've had several Jat families who had tracked in 2017 and 19, who voted for the BJP then, say, hum is baar Hindu Muslim ke jhanse mein nahi aane wale. We know what happened, and this time we know what to do. So if you have Jats disaffected, you certainly have unhappiness in the Gujars in Western UP because they haven't got representation in the government. And you have the Sikhs very unhappy because of what happened in Lakhimpur Kheri. And today the SIT report has come, which called it a planned conspiracy, the mowing down by the MOS Holmes' son and others.
Yes.
Now, this accounts for 100 to 120 seats if you go up to the Terai region in the west, which is a large chunk where they're facing problem. You come to east where Javed has been, the OBCs which went towards the non-Yadav OBCs that went towards the BJP big time, they are also moving away, and the BJP has been worried about this. You know, part of the reason is the Thakur Raj that Javed referred to, because Yogi Adityanath is a Rajput, a Thakur. So there has been a reaction to that. There's also a reaction in the Brahmins. But will they actually, when push comes to shove, will they move away towards Akhilesh Yadav? Akhilesh Yadav has been wooing the Brahmins this time. So a lot, you know, it's a melting pot at the moment. It's a fluid situation caste-wise. But the Prime Minister is trying to have an overarching Hindu messaging, as I said, civilizational messaging, the big grandeur of the messaging, you know, the way you showcase the messenger. And I think it's going to be increasingly, I feel it will be an Akhilesh Yadav versus Narendra Modi pitch in UP rather than Yogi Adityanath. Yogi Adityanath, they seem to be moving, you know, a little bit away from the center, because there has been anger against him, even though he's been quite proactive. You know, these full page ads you see showcasing all the achievements of the Yogi regime. So it remains to be seen, as I say, the extent of the anger, people not being taken in by the machinery, or lot of people may, even the farmers may say, chalo wapis to kar liye laws. Some people may say that. And tomorrow, if they get rid of the MOS home, Ajay Mishra, again, will it be to diffuse some of the anger? The stakes are very high for the BJP and the Prime Minister himself.
So it's likely that Ajay Mishra might be disposed of very close to election day so that it's fresh in the mind.
Possible.
The question really is the Dalit vote. It has become, you know, very quiet. There was an article that was written by Srinan Jha in the Deccan Herald about the irrelevance of the Dalit factor and how there has been crime in Uttar Pradesh constantly against the scheduled castes and the Dalit, but it just doesn't seem to be bringing in that election sort of reaction. Do you agree?
Are you asking me or Javed?
Yes, I'm asking you.
Yeah, no, I think Dalit might, a certain chunk of Dalits will still stay with Mayawati, of her caste, of her grouping. Certain sections of the Dalits, Valmikis, had moved to the BJP. Now, if the Congress has to revive, the Dalits may get divided. That's a simple answer to your question. But if the Congress has to revive in Uttar Pradesh, it will have to get back Dalits on its side. Once it gets the Dalits on its side, the Muslims will be with it and the Brahmins will go back to it. It will go back to its old constituency. But they have not yet been able to do that. They've talked about it over the years, but they have not effectively been able to do that.
Same question to Mr. Ansari. Mr. Ansari, how do you think, you did say that you believe it's the SP's election to lose. This actually goes against the ABPC voter poll that came out 2 days ago, which gave the election to the BJP. And
not surprising.
Not surprising. But where do you see the other factors? Is the Congress a factor at all? Is Mayawati a factor at all?
Look, the Congress, at least what Priyanka Gandhi is ensured is that Congress is a part of the conversation. Earlier, it was not. But the drawback is they don't have an organization. They've been out of power for 30 years. Most of the leaders have drifted away, and it doesn't have a captive caste-based vote bank. The BSP, so the Congress, wherever the leaders are strong, whether it's Aradhana Mishra or some others, they will win. But no, I'd be surprised if they win too many seats. As far as the BSP is concerned, they used to have a 21% vote share. Out of the 21%, 7% were Balmikis and other smaller castes, and the 14 were Chamars and Jatavs, the caste, the Gotra that Mayawati belongs to. that will largely, or 14% will largely remain with Mayawati. She will be a factor in the 70 odd reserved seats in Uttar Pradesh, especially in Western UP, where, her trick is that she gets influential Muslims, wealthy, resourceful Muslims, gives them tickets, and they, in combination with the Dalits, then, because she's the only leader who can transfer votes, they are able to win some seats, and in some places damage others. So Mayawati is a diminished force, but you can't say that she's finished. She's placing a lot of importance on this Brahmin outreach, Dalit and Brahmin. I don't know how far they will succeed, but to my mind, and whatever little I've gathered traveling around Uttar Pradesh, the ones who will make the difference are the smaller castes, the marginal castes, the Saks, the Sainis, the Chauhans, the Kurmis, the Koiris. Kurmis and Koiris were largely with the BJP, but they've begun to shift. Anupriya Patel was inducted into the Union cabinet at the 11th hour, 2.5 years after the after they came to power for the second time. So there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of dissatisfaction, disappointment amongst these smaller castes. Om Prakash Rajbhar may appear to be a maverick, but he has these subcastes are now there to be recognized. You can't wish them away. When all this, and therefore the SP has very smartly, broad-based, reached out to the smaller castes, and I do believe that in a day or two, Akhilesh Yadav and Shivpal Yadav will come to an agreement, and they will be fighting the elections together. So at one point he's trying to shore up his own flanks. At the other, he's trying to bring in more people on board to enlarge his social support base. But it can't just be Yadavs and Muslims. It'll end at 22%. He has to go past 32, 33 to be able to put it past, because the moment he gets to 33, the BJP comes down as well. And it's a very interesting election and a lot of interesting dynamics. So this Bhavya Samaro that you see, and all the papers, all of us in our fraternity tripping over each other to try and see this as a masterstroke. We'll wait and see when the results come out. 700 deaths, and then you undo a blunder and it's a masterstroke. I mean, we are redefining the meaning of the word masterstroke. Thousands of people have died in Uttar Pradesh. I come from a small village in Uttar Pradesh. Every day there were 10 deaths, 12 deaths in my village, So if people can forget, if Mr. Modi's magic works and he makes everybody forget that their father has died, their husband has died, or the only bread earner has died, then he should be Prime Minister for as long as he lives.
Mr. Ansari, even before those deaths happened, there was the migrant labor problem. There are still, there was, I'm assuming, still some pain with the collapse of the economy around the first lockdown. The migrants who had to walk back, most of them to Uttar Pradesh, they were walking from Mumbai, they were walking from other cities. There is definitely pain on the inflation front, like Ms. Chaudhary talked about. I was just reading the news this evening. We have a WPI at 14%. This is the wholesale price index. 14% is ridiculous. Our comfort level in India is between 4 and 6%. 14%. Gas prices are at 1,000 rupees per cylinder. Petrol, diesel. This affects the poorest among us. Is it possible to forget that pain while seeing a fancy light show come out of Kashi? Do you think that might happen?
It's happened. It happened in Bihar. The migration took place before the Bihar elections, and they came back from nowhere to win that election. So, religion is this kind, this huge thing that Neerja was talking about, this civilizational. Why do you think he's gone to Kashi and not to Ayodhya? Ayodhya, whatever traction, Ayodhya has been milked for whatever its political worth. Now there is this promise. Today it's just, creating that huge spectacle there. As it is, the UP Deputy Chief Minister has already spoken of Mathura and Kashi being next on the agenda. So you keep different pots boiling. There are lots of issues. They will talk of development, but behind all that is that civilizational, and behind the garb of civilization is, Hindutva. And religion is something which just makes people forget everything. So now people have to choose whether they vote with their head or with their heart, whether they forget that people died or they will vote in the hope of Uttar Pradesh becoming the promised land. Whether they see Mr. Modi and Mr. Yogi as, Moses who led people to the promised land, or they see him for what he is.
Well, it's interesting because I was reading a lot of the positive reactions on Twitter yesterday to the Kashi event, and most of it read saying that finally, after all these years of independence, we have a government that is acknowledging the importance of this location, that is acknowledging the historic, the religious, the sentimental importance of this location, and giving it the pride and the attention and the work that it deserves. It's an optimistic feeling. It is a feeling that sort of maybe transcends the smaller stuff like death, for example, or COVID, or inflation, or farm distress. Ms. Chaudhary, do you think that the people of Uttar Pradesh are likely to vote saying that never mind these smaller things that we battle all the time, let's look at the big stuff that makes us, that transcends, governments?
I think, in Uttar Pradesh, there is a very clear alternative. In some states, it's a khichdi kind of a situation, or not clear. But in UP, Akhilesh Yadav's party won the local elections also, if you remember, just sitting there.
Yes.
So it's as if people want to move away, are angry, want to move away to give another person a chance. And here is an alternative we've tried in the past. And of course, he's wide-based, bringing RLD on board is a big step that they've taken. And as Javed was saying, Om Prakash Rajbhar, the smaller,
Yes.
The process of mandalization actually is continuing apace. It is, the smaller OBCs also now saying we must get our due share under the sun. We matter. We are so many in numbers. We matter. You take us on board. You listen to us. And when you don't listen to us, then we break away from you and go to the other side, which is what Rajbhar has done, and others also. So my simple thing is that the BJP, I expect the BJP to go down dramatically. But will they still just make it? Given the machinery, given the resources, given Modi's persona, he will be the main campaigner. He will put Yogi and whatever he's done in the shadow. Will this kind of thing work? It may not, and much will depend on whether the sentiment experienced by the people of UP is anger against the regime or mere dissatisfaction, which can be managed.
I have a larger sort of national question. There are moves happening in states that are not in election right now. Karnataka, for example, in the last month, maybe a little more than a month, has become extremely communal. We've had pastors and priests and churches being attacked, Bibles being burned in the street. In Haryana, the government has said that open namaz will not be tolerated. And people praying will not be tolerated. Madhya Pradesh has become a hotbed of communal crime as well. Now, these states are not up for election, but they are BJP-run states. Is there a messaging there, or do you think these things are not connected?
I think it adds to the overall environment. Hindu-Muslim polarization is the BJP's tried and tested card, which has worked for it. And also, they are already starting to prepare for 2024 to create that mahal. They start early. BJP should be studied in detail by the opposition parties, how they manage it. I don't think we've seen anything quite like it. Their management of election, their management of public opinion, perceptions. It really is something that the opposition needs to study. I keep saying this, you had in 2013, July, Amit Shah tasked with the job of bringing UP into the BJP fold in 2014. From a 10 Lok Sabha seat that they had, he took the tally up to 71 Faye in 10 months' time. They were not even in power at the center at that time. How did they do that? It's sheer hard work. It's sheer, as I say, the killer instinct that they have. It's what Americans call hungry, to get there, to get power. Now, I've heard Congress people, Congress leaders for the last 15 years and more talk about, wring their hands and say what to do about UP, the grand old party of India. They don't have the fire in their bellies to seize power, to use it for good. That is the tragedy.
Chaudhary, right now, the opposition, specifically the Congress, is sitting on inflation, Mengai, job loss, it's sitting on corruption, it's sitting on crony capitalism. I mean, the number of planks they have that the BJP keeps handing to them and they don't know what to do with is astounding. They obviously don't have their planning together, or they're not, thinking on their feet. And they have many of their former and current allies thinking of, sort of how to make life go without the Congress at this point.
I think I would say there may be a reason why, of course, the Akhilesh Yadav and his team may think that the Congress brings very little to the table in Uttar Pradesh, why they've not gone in for an alliance, and they will have inflated demands of seats that they will want. But there may be another reason why they've not tied up with the Congress. There may be tacit understanding, by the way, in some number of seats. I'm told people like Kamal Nath have been working on something like this. But it may be that they don't want it to become a Modi versus Rahul show in Uttar Pradesh. They wanted it to be locally fought election on local issues. Now, whether they'll succeed in this, but with Modi coming in, that national element, if he becomes larger than life in the campaigning, that national element does come in. But as far as opposition unity is concerned, I think we have to wait till 2023 or 2024 for the picture to emerge. I think at this point, there's no reason why, they should go in for a national platform, except, coordination in parliament. And if they have to tie up in assembly elections, that there are a whole dozen of them between now and 2024, then they can do that bilaterally. They don't need to, get this overarching opposition unity at this stage of the game. So let each one strengthen their basis and then come together and see who has what.
Mr. Ansari, I know you want to comment on the opposition and also on, the sort of heating up of the communal agenda across the country.
Why are you surprised? I mean, what's new? Every time there is an election, this is not the country that you and I grew up in. That is not the country that even Neerja ji grew up in. This has changed. Our Honorable Prime Minister, while addressing the DGPs, told them that मैंने जन का मन बदल दिया है. I've changed the mindset of the people. Go ahead, bash on regardless. And they have indeed. Just look at people around you. Till yesterday they were singing a totally different tune. Today, the kind of language they talk, the terminology they use, the way they react just baffles me. It used to baffle me, now it scares me. So, I mean, why are we surprised? They have changed it. But coming back to Uttar Pradesh, the BJP, I said that this is an election for the SP to lose, and the BJP can't afford to lose this election. It's vital for Mr. Modi to retain UP if he wants to retain power in 2024. I mean, even without UP, he may still go on and win the election, but it will be a very, very difficult. I spent some time with Akhilesh and with Javed Chaudhary and even with the Congress leaders, and all of them are very that, they're just still second guessing as to what the BJP will do. They may pull out something out of the hat to try and arrest the narrative, to try and do something to ensure that the UP doesn't slip away from their hands. Because UP is, where people may like it or lump it, may not like this. And I'm not saying it because I am from UP, but the fact is that the road to Delhi starts from Lucknow. You have to win Lucknow to be able to run a successful government here. And therefore,
Mr. Ansari, you disagree with Prashant Kishore, who said that Lucknow is not an indicator of what will happen in 2024?
Prashant Kishore is very good at what he does, but he's not the last word on it, I must say.
And do you think at this point, it's interesting because Ms. Chaudhary said that the Congress right now doesn't want it to become a Rahul versus Narendra Modi.
Yeah, that's the point. That's
Yes.
the point I wanted. The reason why they haven't gone in for an alliance with the Congress is, one, the Congress just demands too many seats. They botched it up, and the reason why the BJP and JDU are in power is there because the Congress contested so many seats far above its strength, and they lost it, and those seats went to the BJP. The other reason is that if the Congress contests on its own, and Priyanka Gandhi has brought back some vigor, enthusiasm, you talk to Congress workers there, and you see, there is a spring in their step. It could be misplaced, but there. So if they contest on their vote, they may be able to entice some of the votes away from the BJP, the upper caste votes, principally the Brahmins, the Kayas, and the others, because those who want to vote against the BJP will vote one way.
Yes.
My guess is that they will vote overwhelmingly in favor of Akhilesh Yadav's SP. But the Brahmins and all because there is a certain amount of anger amongst Brahmins at the way Mr. Bish has written roughshod over them, and he's promoted the Rajputs totally out of proportion to their strengths in Uttar Pradesh. So that's another reason why they haven't tied up with the Congress, and they would be hoping, and Neerja says that there could be a tacit side. Perhaps they'd be hoping that the Congress will be able to put up a fight, if not in a larger number of seats than earlier, so that they can wean away some of the votes.
Ms. Chaudhary?
There is another thing that I often wonder about, that, a slump in what is the best case scenario for Mr. Modi and Mr. Amit Shah in UP? It is to win UP, but just win. If you have a handsome victory like last time, then it will strengthen Yogi Adityanath. And he is seen as a claimant for prime ministership the next time round. If not 24, certainly 29. And from all accounts, the RSS is looking at him that he will take the Hindu agenda the next step forward after Modi. So, but is that something the Prime Minister and Mr. Amit Shah will want? Question mark. Therefore, and yet they cannot afford to lose UP, because then that sets the tempo for 2024. And it becomes very problematic if BJP loses. So the best case scenario for them also will be just manage to form the government. So Yogi Adityanath doesn't become larger than life.
Mr. Ansari, I'll give you the last word on this. Obviously, for people watching around the country, UP is the biggest state. It's obviously going to be a very large, very loud election. The thing that we haven't talked about is the considerable financial clout that the BJP has over all of its opponents. It is, as we have seen via electoral bonds and maybe other sources as well, it is flushed with cash in comparison to its opponents. What role will that play in this election?
That will play a role, but that won't be a determining factor. As far as resources are concerned, there is no match. You put the Congress, SP, BSP, and every other Tom, Dick, and Harry together, they will still not be able to match the BJP in terms of resources, in terms of money. But having said that, if money alone decided elections, then Tata, Birla, Ambani, Adani would have been the Prime Minister of India, not other parties. So ultimately, it's the people who vote. And when you've lost your father, when you've lost your wife, when you've lost other, when you're paying through your nose to make ends meet, when the prices of petrol, diesel, kerosene, pulses, everything else is touching the roof, who knows? Then they may keep the money and still not vote.
All right, Mr. Ansari and Ms. Chaudhary, thank you so much for giving us your time and helping us understand what's going on in Uttar Pradesh. These are elections that we're going to be tracking closely as the months go by. Remember, we're looking at February and March when these elections will happen. For our audience, thank you for joining us. The news will be up at exactly 9 o'clock to take a look at it. Thank you all.